What's holding you back? I'm Joseph. This is Input English. As people try to accomplish all sorts of goals, frequently they run into difficulties. This is normal. This is a slice of life, and we are called upon daily to figure out what is holding us back. What is the rate limiting factor that prevents us from getting the kind of success we want? So what I'd like to do today is analyze that against our journey to learn English. I think you'll find this quite useful. Today we're going to go through 4 points, and as I go through them, I expect that you will be able to identify the 1 or 2 that apply most to your situation. The 4 points are time, I can't, mindset or attitude, and efficiencies. Let's start with time. We only have so much time. How could a busy person find the time to learn a new language, particularly one as complex as English? I recognize that we all have obligations. Common obligations include the obligation to our career, the obligations that we willingly accept to spend time with our family and friends. We may have obligations that we have taken on in the community. This is not where I propose that you find the time to learn English. We also have an obligation biologically to rest and sleep. On average, people need to sleep 7 or 8 hours a day, and this is not the time I propose you use for language learning. In a given 24-hour period, if you subtract out the time required for sleep, and then additionally subtract out the time for obligations, what we're left with is discretionary time. Studies have shown that people in the 21st century frequently use this discretionary time to do such things as watch television or surf the internet. So we can identify this discretionary time as where you're going to be able to schedule language learning if you like. There are 3 issues intimately related to how we will be able to find the time to learn a new language. Number 1 is motivation. If you want something enough, you will find the time to do it. So motivation is actually something you are in charge of. I can do my best to help motivate people to embrace comprehensible input and learn English, but my ability to do that is somewhat limited. A lot of that is an inside job. You're in charge of how enthusiastic you are about learning the new language. One of the best ways to bolster your motivation is to make sure that the input you are getting is enjoyable. It is very difficult to stay motivated if the task that you have set before yourself is boring and unpleasant. This is where comprehensible input shines. If you can access good input that you can understand, that is interesting to you, and that captures your imagination, then you're unstoppable. This will help a great deal with motivation. The second issue with time is distraction. The caption for the 21st century should be distraction. Every place you look, someone is trying to get your attention. They're trying to get you to believe something. They're trying to get you to buy something. They're trying to get you to watch a video to the very end. In the online environment, a lot of effort is put into creating content which will catch your eye and cause you to click and watch. It is certainly possible to fritter away an entire afternoon clicking on videos which in retrospect provided no benefit to you whatsoever. They were just clickbait. The third issue with finding the time to learn English is inconsistency. We are most efficient learning something new if we do a little bit at a time, but do so very consistently. This is where habits come into play. If you're trying to find the time to learn English, one of your best tools is habit formation. I've explained in other videos that habit formation was a key feature of my success learning Spanish. I formed the habit that each morning with coffee, I got input. I expanded that habit to include my breakfast while watching input. It didn't take long for that habit to include 1 hour of input before I started my day. Once my level in Spanish got high enough that I could understand podcasts, that opened up the car as a learning location. When I was driving to work, driving to the store, I could listen to podcasts and get a great deal of input. Now, where the habit came into play is the consistency of always getting input while driving the car. In the evenings, most of us have some discretionary time. Then we have a decision to make. How are we going to use that? Some of us like to read. If that's your pattern, then perhaps you would like to read in English. You don't have to read a tremendous amount in English, but you might want to position a book with an appropriate level of language so that you can understand it, so that you can read at least a little bit each evening, if reading is your evening leisure activity. Many people watch television or surf the net in the evenings. If this is your pattern and you enjoy that, you might factor in some English language content into that activity. As I've explained in other videos, watching television series may not be your best use of time to learn English. Native content is frequently difficult to understand, and it may not be that dense in terms of language. We have to remember that native content is usually made for entertainment, and if we use it for language learning, we're actually repurposing something that was not made with the intent that it be used for language learning. We're adapting it, and when we adapt it, it may not be very efficient. This is particularly so with movies. Feature-length movies have a lot of chase scenes, explosions, scenery, music, knowing looks, fight scenes. There's a lot of action, and it's very entertaining, but it may not be very dense in terms of language. To make things worse, the language in feature-length movies, being native content, may be difficult to understand. If you can find consistency in your input gathering behavior, it will pay off for you. I don't dictate how much input you get each day, but I do advocate that you find a reasonable level of consistency so that you can see progress. While we're on that topic, I get a lot of questions. How many hours of input will it take to learn English? How long will it take to get fluent? And of course, I don't have a specific numerical answer for that. The answer is it depends. It depends on your starting point, that is, how much English you already know. It depends on how much input you get each day. It depends on how similar your native language is to English. If you are coming to English from a European language, it's going to take fewer hours to get fluent as compared to someone coming to English from a non-European language. In terms of setting your expectations, if you are coming to English from a European language, think in terms of a couple thousand hours. If you're coming to English from a non-European language, think in terms of 2 or 3 times that much input. Of course, these rough estimates of the amount of input will be refined along the way. This certainly was the case with me and my journey in Spanish. I was led to believe that once I got to 1,500 hours, I would be substantially fluent. That was not the case. When I got to 1,500 hours, by that time I realized I needed a lot more input, and I was starting to speak spontaneously. Now I have more than 2,000 hours of input in Spanish, and I am not fluent. However, I am very satisfied with the amount of progress that I have made thus far, and I remain committed to getting more input and more speaking experience over time. The second topic is I can't. Many of us believe that we cannot learn a second language. Many of us believe we are too old because we missed that opportunity to learn the language when we were much younger. It is common to believe you can't learn English because of previous failures. You've tried several apps and you've taken some courses and it didn't result in much progress. So that generates this belief, I can't. In reality, previous failure does not accurately predict future failure. Now that you've found comprehensible input as a methodology, your success is much more likely. Unrealistic expectations may contribute to the feeling I can't. People make unrealistic and unreasonable claims online, and you've seen them on the internet. Get fluent in 30 days. Get fluent in 90 days. No effort. Learn English in your sleep. These sensational features online are a great disservice to serious language learners because we know it takes time. If we fall into the trap of believing that people can learn a language in a month, and then we compare our experience to that level of ability, then we can form the opinion that we simply cannot do this. It is common for people to form the opinion that they can't learn a language because they're not a genius or they don't have a knack for learning languages. Those two opinions don't hold water. The human brain has evolved to learn languages. People are incredibly successful learning languages if they use effective methods. One of our big problems with language learning in the 21st century is the residual memory that most of us have trying to learn languages by unfortunate educational methods created by school systems and corporations. We were taught grammar and vocabulary. We were taught the structure of the language. We didn't learn the language, we learned about the language. And the end result is we form the opinion, I can't. We need to get over that. Comprehensible input is the key to getting over I can't. There are some mindsets that interfere with good language learning. One of them I've already mentioned, the belief that you need to have a special talent. Simply put, if you're a human being, you have that special talent. If we classify language learning as work, if we make it a task that we have to work on, like we studied in school, memorizing and studying grammar, then we will not be very successful. We are not naturally drawn to doing things that we have classified mentally as work. If we can realize that learning English is actually fun and enjoyable, and we classify it in our mind as a recreational activity, then success is much more likely. We get a lot of bad advice. The online community frequently gives us very bad advice about language learning. As you look for input in English online, you will quickly find people giving out advice on how to do this, and frequently they advise memorization, using flashcards, grammar drills, workbooks, and I consider all that bad advice. The trouble is, if you use your valuable time doing those inefficient, ineffective activities, then you're going to make less progress. The result of making less progress is a negative effect on your motivation. You're probably now seeing how these categories are all tied together. With respect to comprehensible input, there is a manufactured controversy online which may catch your eye. That is, comprehensible input is frequently criticized for being passive. It's passive. It sounds negative, doesn't it? It sounds bad. Why would you want to do something passive when you could do something active? This is a manufactured controversy. This is nonsense. In order to actively produce the language, that is to speak, you need to know some of it in here. This was one of many great flaws in traditional learning of languages. It was common to force students to speak and produce the language before they knew any of it. This caused frustration, it contributed to terrible pronunciation, and it contributed to people quitting. The relationship between input and output in language is not complicated. The input is there so that you can output. But if you start with output before you have enough input, what will happen? Frustration, poor pronunciation, lack of progress, stress, burnout. Now, there are choices you will make about output, the active phase of producing the language. And I don't dictate what you must do. Your circumstances may dictate that. If you are living or working in an English-speaking environment, you may be forced to output language in order to function or in order to survive. If that is the case, then you should adapt. You should output sooner. Be sure to get enough input so that that output is useful. Another approach advocated by experts in the field is to get enough input that the language just comes out of you automatically. This was the approach that I took with Spanish. I created a learning experience for myself over a period of years, getting a lot of input each day. I averaged 3.5 hours a day. Now, I would submit that getting 3.5 hours of input per day is not passive. It takes a lot of effort to get that much input per day. 15 minutes of input per day, that's pretty passive. It's also very slow to build that mental image of the language in your brain. Having attained 2,000 hours of input in Spanish, I had a choice to make. Was I going to turn this into a very stressful demand on myself to produce the language now? Or was I going to continue a more relaxed, enjoyable pace and let the language continue to grow? I chose the latter. Part of this was dictated by circumstances because I was not in a position to travel much. I would like to travel to a Spanish-speaking country and be forced to use my language in the day-to-day. I've also thought in terms of using an app like Tandem, or perhaps even hiring a tutor to engage in conversation so that I can get more speaking practice. Because I don't have a requirement placed upon me to produce the language now. I've not rushed into this. If my circumstances were different, I would likely take a more aggressive approach to output. Our last category is efficiencies. There are things that we do as language learners which may improve our efficiency or decrease our efficiency. The first one to talk about is perfectionism. With comprehensible input, perfectionism is not the way of the language learner. Perfectionism might have you look up too many words, study too much grammar, and waste your time, thus decreasing your efficiency. You're much better advised to just keep going, get more input. We don't want to be perfectionists if we're using comprehensible input. We need to be good shepherds of our time. Once we have embraced comprehensible input and we're using it to learn the language, we don't want to take a big chunk of our valuable time and use it for less productive activities. If your program is based somewhat in comprehensible input, but you're spending a lot of time memorizing lists of words or studying grammar, then that traditional study method that you've embraced is actually going to decrease your efficiency. If a lot of the input you are receiving is from feature-length films or native content that you do not understand, that behavior will decrease your efficiency. Until one gets to the advanced intermediate stage, native content may not be your best source of input. This was very much the case in my experience learning Spanish. Since the very beginning, I would look online for native content and sample it. I chose YouTube channels that were very interesting to me, and in the beginning, they made no sense. Over time, I could see that those channels got progressively easier and easier for me to understand. Well, they're not changing the input. I'm the one that's changing. As my level of comprehension got better, that material got easier. Over time, I added more and more similar native content to my daily input because it was at a level that I could easily comprehend and it was subject matter that I was very interested in. And the last problem with efficiency that I will share for you is a belief that we learned in school that in order to learn something, we have to struggle, we have to stretch, we have to strive to get something. With that attitude, we may be tempted to use input at a level above what we can really understand. Studies on this subject are very clear. The input that you consume to learn a language, in this case English, should be so understandable that you completely understand the story and you're only missing a few words here and there. When you choose content that you are using for comprehensible input, you want it to be relatively easy. You don't want to strive and struggle and stress yourself, because that will decrease your efficiency. These 4 topics I've given you today are interrelated. None are isolated concepts. Where do I find the time? I can't do it. Our attitude and our efficiencies, these are all completely interrelated. However, if you look at your pattern of language learning, you may be able to identify the most important bottleneck, the biggest barrier to your success. The most common barrier that people encounter using comprehensible input is not enough time in contact with the language using an appropriate level of input. For most people, this problem can be solved by finding input that you find comprehensible, relatively easy to understand, interesting subject matter, and the presentation is compelling so that you want to watch it. That way you can believe that it is fun, not a job that you have to do. And then if you can use the power of habits, you can consistently get enough input that you will start seeing progress. That will feed back to help you with your motivation. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.